Welcome to Cain and Table.
All right.
I am Will Cain, and I'm with John Chait of the New Republic. So, John, the question is,
Yes.
What kind of socialist is Barack Obama? But before we get started on that, I think the most absurd and asinine part of the debate over whether or not Obama is a socialist is the assumption on both the right and the left that using the word socialist is just a bunch of dirty name calling. And I do think some on the left think that whenever a conservative says socialist, they mean you Stalinist gulag runner. And I think some on the right, some buffoons on the right, might actually mean that. So let's just set aside that junk. And I'm really curious what your take is, though. Is Obama a socialist?
I don't think he's a socialist. He's a liberal. And I think there's a difference between liberalism and socialism. I think you can, by stretching very far, define socialism so that it means liberalism. That's what Jonah Goldberg did in his commentary piece. But then you've basically defined liberalism essentially out of existence. What I think people are trying to do when they define Obama as a socialist is to say that he is ideologically out of character with American history. That before we've had Democrats, we've had liberals, but we've never had anyone like this. He's taking the country in a completely ideologically different direction.
Well, John,
it's motivated by a totally different ideology than these prior Democrats.
Right. Tell me then, what is the definition of socialism in your book? What is a socialist?
Right. I think the best definition is someone who believes in one or both of the two following things: government ownership of the primary means of production, and or elimination or near elimination of disparities of income.
Okay. Now, I think Jonah's response, and I hate to do the arguing for Jonah, but we both read his piece, is that, there's a common strain of socialism in Western Europe that we're going to call social democracy, right? And in these types of societies and that type of governmental structure, I think Jonah's argument would be, it's not necessary to own the heights of business, but rather to just control it through regulation. So whether or not it is a full-throated socialism or this watered-down version of social democracy, the argument is that is what Obama is taking us towards.
Right. Well, what distinction are you going to draw between what he's doing and liberalism?
So that is what liberalism is?
Well, I think I think there is a pretty coherent strain of economic liberalism that you can trace, certainly beginning with Roosevelt, and that's defined certainly modern Democratic Party, Upper D Party policymaking, and a lot of Republican policymaking,
right.
Although that tradition is kind of petered out, and that's the tradition that Obama's in. You could make an argument that tradition could be called a kind of social democracy, or is a weaker version of social democracy, which is itself a weaker version of socialism. But I think you're just diluting the term, so it doesn't really mean what it ought to mean anymore.
Okay, before I ask you to distinguish those, I think I'm going to concede that point to you and say, fine, we've been on a slow march towards social democracy with all of the post-war presidents, from Roosevelt through Lyndon, through LBJ, up through George W. Bush. And I think the feeling among a lot of conservatives is, with Obama, we're reaching a tipping point where, at least at this point, we might be getting to some ideological honesty, that his philosophy is one that we can finally see at least is honest about its social democracy intentions.
I don't see how you can make any kind of qualitative difference between what he's doing and what previous presidents are doing.
Really?
Plenty of previous presidents have attempted to provide health care for all Americans. The main difference between Obama and them is, number one, he was successful, of course. Number two, that he attempted to do it in the least intrusive possible way in terms of government involvement. Lyndon Johnson imposed a single payer healthcare system in Medicare, and Clinton's program was much more liberal. I would say much more. It was more liberal than Obama's. So. I think, again, you're getting into this idea of trying to draw some divide between Obama's philosophy and these previous presidents, and I don't see it.
You don't see the difference?
The other example would be that, okay, he bailed out the auto industry.
Right.
But Jimmy Carter bailed out the an auto company. You had Truman and Kennedy basically taking very strong, tough measures to basically just bring in the army to kind of make companies do what they want, which is essentially, I would say, a more intrusive use of government in the private sector. So
your argument basically is he's not all that different from the presidents of the past. So why the uproar now?
That's right. I mean, well, and I think the uproar now is primarily a political attempt to really frighten people. That's dramatically different than what we've seen in the past, which I don't think is true.
Okay, so you're distinguishing between economic liberalism and socialism, which I think is important, and I actually want you to do that for me. But we're talking about not really bright lines of differentiation here. We're talking about two colors essentially next to each other on the rainbow with a lot of bleed and a lot of blending. So the question is then, where are we on that blend? You could make an argument we've taken a big ownership position in the auto industry, we've taken a big ownership position in the banking industry, and now we've taken an even yet bigger role in the healthcare industry. So when do we cross that line in John Chait's book from economic liberalism to socialism?
Again, like I said at the beginning, I do think that there is a pretty clear definition of what's real socialism and not just social democracy. You can talk about social democracy as being weaker socialism, but it's still not really socialism. You're right. You can keep being liberal and you could push the government up to 30, 40, 50% of GDP. And at some point you could say, all right, this isn't really the same thing anymore. But, aside from the temporary spike of the stimulus, I think you're going to see government spending as a share of GDP on a pretty normal course by the midpoint by 2012, 2013, by the end of the recession. You'll accept that it's bigger. It's because of the natural growth of the entitlement programs that Obama hasn't legislated.
Without resetting the conversation, John, let me just ask you one question. I've only got a minute, but okay, let's throw away socialist. Okay, is Obama a social democrat?
Mm-hmm. I don't know. It depends on how you define that. If you define that to mean pretty much liberalism, then yes. But if you don't, then no. That's to me is an even fuzzier term than liberal. The people who are social democrats have end goals for this economy that are different than Obama's. The people who I can think of who defines himself as social democrat, well, like Robert Kuttner and Harold Meyerson, those people are well to Obama's left. And to the extent that they can approve of what he's done, it's merely as a compromise with their ideal. In terms of their ideal, they're pretty far away from what Obama is both doing and I suspect would want to do even if he was free of political constraints.
And I guess the final question would be, have we reached Obama's end goal, or is this compromised position on the Harold Meyerson perspective just where we are right now? Give Obama another 3 years and he'll arrive there.
Well, I don't think he will arrive there because basically I think he's gone as far as he can go politically. Now, could he, if you gave him, the same margins of Democratic for Congress? I don't think he necessarily would. I mean, I think basically the agenda he governed on is really where he wants to go, the agenda that he campaigned on. That really, I think, is his actual ambitions.
Okay. You guys can find John on The New Republic. You can follow me on Twitter at Will Cain. John, I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Will. It's a great interview.